Hello, I'm David Sunfellow, founder and president of New Heaven, New Earth, or NHNE, a small internet-based nonprofit. In January and March of 2012, I gave two presentations in Sedona, Arizona entitled, How Near-Death Experiences Are Changing the World. This video is a summary of those two presentations. I've created it for members of New Heaven, New Earth and also members of the general public who might be interested in learning more about this very important topic. Altogether, 16 different near-death experiences are featured on this two-part video. They have all been handpicked by me, first to give viewers a clear idea of just how diverse the NDE phenomena is, and second, to identify the themes, messages, and potentially life-changing insights that emerge from carefully examining this universal experience. All of the people, books, and resources that are mentioned in this video are clearly identified in the presentation itself or in the footnotes that accompany it. This will allow those of you who are interested to follow everything I share with you back to its source. The two presentations that took place in Sedona were co-sponsored by New Heaven, New Earth and the Mustard Seed Venture. What do these two organizations have in common? The answer is Jesus and his preoccupation with what he referred to as the kingdom of God. We found common ground when I realized that there was no other historical, spiritually oriented person that I was aware of who had more in common with the core truths presented by near-death experiences than Jesus. Here's a quick list of some of the things that Jesus has in common with near-death experiences. A laser-like focus on a peaceful, loving reality, what Jesus called the kingdom of God, that surrounds, infuses, and reigns over the hostile, everyone out for themselves, fear-based reality of this world. God was portrayed as a hands-on, loving, caring, forgiving, guiding, protecting, and profoundly personal presence. There was an emphasis on love and relationships, an emphasis on treating others as if they were and are ourselves, an emphasis on holding people accountable for their shortcomings, but doing so with great love and compassion. An encounter with Jesus often caused others to make radical changes in their lives, relationships, careers, beliefs, values, and goals. According to the records we have, Jesus produced miraculous healings. And Jesus also had the reported ability to bend and control the physical laws of this world. As you listen to the near-death experiences presented in this video, you'll notice that these themes repeat again and again, which leads to the very real possibility that whatever inspired Jesus 2,000 years ago is spreading out and touching down on a global scale today. Whereas in ages past, Jesus and others like him were lone voices in the wilderness, now there are untold millions all over the world experiencing, sharing, and pointing to very similar things. Many people, for many reasons, have an aversion to Jesus or Christianity. If you do, I encourage you to relax. This presentation is not about either. I will in fact be spending time in the second part of this video suggesting that many of the spiritual figures that people encounter in near-death experiences, including Jesus, are not necessarily who they appear to be. You'll see, as I did, that things are quite a bit more complicated and interesting. So be sure to watch the second part of this presentation before drawing any conclusions. All this sets the stage for $2 million questions. Can you and I experience the kingdom of God, the heavenly realms of light and love that probably inspired Jesus 2,000 years ago and that untold millions all over the world are experiencing today? And can near-death experiences, having them, sharing them, and applying their lessons in our lives help change, heal, and transform our world? In part one of this presentation, we're going to look at the history of near-death experiences, learn about their common characteristics, and hear firsthand several remarkable stories. While near-death experiences are increasingly common today, there are also records of these experiences in history. The oldest story we have comes to us from Plato's Republic. In the last chapter of his famous book, Plato recounts a story from Socrates of an ordinary soldier named Ur. Ur is killed in battle, and 12 days later, just before his body is burned, he returns to life with an amazing tale. Ur reports that his soul left his body and he went on a journey. Among other things, Ur encounters judges who separate those who live good lives from those who live selfish ones. Noble souls are sent to heavenly realms, while evil souls are sent to hellish ones. Ur also learned about reincarnation, discovered that souls are eternal, was shown how memories of the higher realms are erased when we come to earth. He was instructed on how to make good choices before returning to earth, and finally, Ur was told that it was his mission to return and tell others about what he'd learned. Although this story was recorded 2,400 years ago, many of the same themes appear in modern near-death experiences. What I think is especially worth noting about Ur's story is that it was clothed in the gods, goddesses, and sirens of his day in mythology. This is an important theme that is repeated again and again all over the world, past and present. While the core messages of near-death experiences are very similar, the visions that deliver these messages vary widely. Our next historical NDE is not a story per se, but a painting. It was produced by a Dutch artist who lived from 1480 until 1516. While no one knows the story behind his painting, which is called The Ascent into the Highest Heaven, it clearly depicts many of the key features associated with near-death experiences, including a brilliant white light, a tunnel, angels, and souls being drawn to the light. An admiral in the Royal Navy provides our next NDE. In the 1800s, after almost drowning, Admiral Beaufort was shown the effects his death would have on his father. Beaufort also described a classic life review. He wrote, "The whole period of my existence seemed to be placed before me in a kind of panoramic review, and each of it seemed to be accompanied by a consciousness of right or wrong, or by some reflection on its cause or consequences. Indeed, many trifling events which had been forgotten then crowded into my imagination." The last historical NDE I want to share with you is not actually a near-death experience at all. Instead, it is what has come to be called a near-death-like experience. People who have these kind of experiences report the same kind of events that occur in classic NDEs. They also report the same kind of life-changing after effects. The only difference is they do not die. Black Elk was a Lakota medicine man. While participating in a ghost dance at Wounded Knee, South Dakota in 1890, he describes leaving his body and visiting a heavenly land where his ancestors were said to live after their earthly lives came to an end. Here's what Black Elk said he saw. "I could see a beautiful land where many people were camping in a great circle. I could see that they were happy and had plenty. Everywhere there were drying racks full of meat. The air was clear and beautiful with a living light that was everywhere. All around the circle, feeding on the green grass, were fat and happy horses, and animals of all kinds were scattered all over the green hills, and singing hunters were returning with their meat. I floated over the teepees and began to come down feet first at the center of the hoop, where I could see a beautiful tree all green and full of flowers. When I touched the ground, 2 men were coming toward me, and they wore holy shirts. They came to me and said, 'It is not time yet to see your father, who is happy. You have work to do. We will give you something that you shall carry back to your people, and with it they shall come to see their loved ones.' They told me to return at once, and then I was out in the air again, floating fast as before. Then I fell back into my body." Here again we find classic near-death experience themes. Black Elk visits a heavenly realm where heavenly messengers tell him he must return to earth and share what he has seen. Like the near-death experience that Ur reported, we can also see how Black Elk's experience is clothed in the imagery of his time and culture. To learn more about the 4 historical NDEs I've shared here and others like them, you can visit NHNE Pulse. The link to this historical page is located here and in the footnotes below. Now that we spent a little time exploring historical NDEs, it's time to look at contemporary ones. Today's near-death experience movement began in 1943 when a 20-year-old Army private named George Ritchie died of pneumonia. While Ritchie didn't know it at the time, his near-death experience would eventually become the spark that ignited today's movement. I'll have more to say about that in a moment. First, let's listen to Ritchie describe his life review and encounter with Jesus, which included this haunting question: what have you done with your life?
Three things happened at the exact same moment. Something deep inside of my spiritual being, not the corpse lying over in the bed, said, stand up, you're in the presence of the Son of God. At that exact same instant, out of this brilliant light stepped the most amazing being I have ever met, and those hospital walls virtually disappeared. I saw every single minute detail of my life, everything I had ever done in public and private, from seeing my own cesarean section birth through my 20th year when I was pronounced dead. And he threw a question, what had I done with my life? And I thought, well, I'm an Eagle Scout. Immediately he shot back, that glorified you. And the same question again, what have you done with your life? Now over there in that realm, there is no such thing as hypocrisy, because one of the first things that you become aware of is that the other being is totally aware of what you think, so you can't think one thing and say another. There's no such thing as misunderstanding what he meant. And yet, here was a being that knew everything about me, and he totally accepted me and he totally loved me. Now that blew my mind.
I previously mentioned that George Ritchie's near-death experience ignited today's NDE movement. That's because Ritchie went on to become a doctor, and his path eventually crossed with another doctor by the name of Raymond Moody. When Dr. Moody heard Dr. Ritchie's story, he was so impressed that he began collecting the stories of other people who had similar experiences. In 1975, Moody published the results of his research, which was based on more than 100 NDEs. The book, which was dedicated to Dr. Ritchie, was called Life After Life. To date, it has sold over 20 million copies. And the rest, as they say, is history. Along with coining the term near-death experience, Moody's book and corresponding research launched today's near-death experience movement. 4 years after Moody published his groundbreaking book, Ritchie published a book that described in detail his remarkable near-death experience. Ritchie's book was called Return from Tomorrow. Like many of the near-death experiencers that are featured in this video, I have created a special page for George Ritchie on the NDE Stories website. Among other things, this page includes links to Ritchie's book, a written account of his experience, and a longer version of the video that we just watched. Raymond Moody's best-selling book was published 37 years ago. Since then, there have been many books published on this topic, and many more are coming out every day. Likewise, increasing numbers of people from all over the world are now having and reporting near-death experiences. How many? A 1992 Gallup poll indicated that 13 million Americans, or 5% of the population, had experienced an NDE. That works out to 774 people a day in America. And these statistics are from 20 years ago, when fewer people were experiencing NDEs and when those who did were reluctant to talk about them. A poll that was conducted in Germany in 2001 indicated 4% of the population had experienced an NDE. A 2005 poll that was conducted in Australia revealed the highest incident of NDEs at almost 9%. These polls indicate that large numbers of people are experiencing NDEs, but polling is an old-fashioned way to acquire accurate numbers. The Internet and people like Dr. Jeffrey Long are giving us new, more accurate and comprehensive ways to collect and analyze NDE stories. Long's organization, called the Near-Death Experience Research Foundation, has created a website that allows people to submit written accounts of their experiences. Based on the information collected from this website, Long published a book called Evidence of the Afterlife. His book, which analyzed 1,300 NDEs from people all over the world, is the largest study to date. By the time Long's book was published, his website contained 1,600 NDEs. Now, 2 years later, this number has almost doubled to 3,000. According to Long's research, the core NDE experience is the same all over the world. Whether it's a near-death experience of a Hindu in India, a Muslim in Egypt, or a Christian in the United States, the same core elements are present in all, including out-of-body experience, tunnel experience, feelings of peace, beings of light, a life review, reluctance to return, and transformation after the NDE. In short, the experience of dying appears similar among all humans no matter where they live. Long concludes, the results of the NDERF study finds that what people discovered during their near-death experience about God, love, afterlife, reason for our earthly existence, earthly hardships, forgiveness, and many other concepts is strikingly consistent across cultures, races, and creeds. Also, these discoveries are generally not what would have been expected from pre-existing societal beliefs, religious teachings, or any other source of earthly knowledge. While no two NDEs are identical, Long discovered that 12 elements repeat again and again, usually in consistent order. A PDF handout of the 12 elements of NDEs is included in the footnotes below. You can download this list and follow along with me as I summarize them now. Listed in the order of their occurrence, here are the 12 elements of NDEs that Dr. Long identified. 75% of the people in Long's study reported having an out-of-body experience. 74% heightened senses. 76% intense and generally positive emotions or feelings. 33% passing into or through a tunnel. 64% encountering a mystical or brilliant light. 57% encountering other beings, either mystical beings or deceased friends and relatives. 60% a sense of alteration of time and space. 22% a life review. 40% encountering unworldly heavenly realms. 56% encountering or learning special knowledge. 31% encountering a boundary or barrier. And finally, 58% return to the body, either voluntary or involuntary. Now that we've learned about the history of NDEs, know that they are being reported with increasing frequency by people all over the world, and also know a little bit about the main elements that consistently occur during these experiences. Let's listen as several people share their stories.
My husband was by my bed, and I saw that light, and then I remember kind of looking at him. So I was like, okay, so I see this light, but I'm not dreaming. And so then all of a sudden I closed my eyes, and I was thinking, is that the tunnel that the cancer patients used to tell me about? Because it is not impressive. Like, it was so small. And then all of a sudden it came larger, and I folded into it. And I was in it. And it's a warm, incredibly warm, loving feeling, and you're not afraid. And I was moving through it, but I wasn't being sucked, but it was just like I was moving through the tunnel. I don't remember my whole body being part of it, nor do I remember really caring. Like, I felt totally me. But I don't remember paying special attention, like, is my body going with me? Do I have eyes? Are my ears? I just remember going through it. And then I came out into this room. And the room was magnificent. And I don't even know what else to tell you. It was, I shouldn't even say it was a room, because I didn't see any walls, and nor did I see any limitations, but I had the sense it was a room, and it was a very brilliant color. There's not an earth color to say what it is. I don't even know. I call it pink because it had a hint of a soft, because if you think of brilliant, you think of harsh, but this room was not harsh. It was soft, and mostly it was so accepting and loving. And I remember then that something holds me. I don't remember how I got there, but something is holding me, because I can feel it physically around me. And it says, Mary Jo, you cannot stay. And I say, why? Or first I was upset. I said, what? And it said, you cannot stay. And then I said, why? And this voice that I don't see his face, I can't tell you what it looks like because I have no idea. It says to me, you can't stay because you have more to do. And I said, oh, more to do? And he goes, yes, you haven't given enough. And I said, I haven't given enough. And I started talking about every human acolyte I could think. I started saying, you know, I work at that cancer center. I only get paid $600 a month. I'm on 24/7 call. There's nobody that can't call me in the middle of the night, and I actually answer the phone and talk to him. Everything possible that I could brag about on a tombstone, I talked to this God about. And then God says, well, let me ask you one question. And then it says, have you ever loved any person the way you've been loved in this short time here? And I said, no, it's impossible. I'm just a human. And it kind of chuckled. It wasn't human, but it was able to relate to me in a very human way that made me feel loved. And it wasn't laughing at me, but it was a chuckle, like it had a playful edge, and it said, you can do better. And then I remember waking up, and Ron was crying, and he's got this form of what they give you when you're going to have surgery. And he's like, Mary, you know, we got to go over this form. I need to know that you know what I'm saying. And then Ron goes, Mary, listen, you know, you could die. You're really sick, and they're going to have to do surgery on you. And I said, you know what? I'm not going to die, because I just talked to God and He won't let me.
Were you a skeptic before this about
yes.
this? You were?
Yes, I was working with cancer patients prior to this happening. I was getting ready to move to Houston. I was probably at the lowest point in any faith. I had seen terrible things in that cancer center, people dying, and when I would go in and they would tell me they saw things, I would respond. I would just sit there, and they would say, can you see them? And I'd say, no, I can't see them. Then I would leave the room and tell the resident, you better check their morphine.
Those patients that you were there with who said they too had now seen heaven or God or the tunnel, and you turned your back on them.
Well, I was present with them, but the sense I turned my back is when I would leave the room, I would tell the resident, I think you better get a morphine level on them, because I think they're hallucinating.
So you thought there's other stories from people where they thought they'd gone to heaven, that they're just hallucinating?
Had I seen them now, those patients who were telling me they were seeing angels, I would have embraced that and said, really? Let's talk about it. Tell me. Because they were telling me what God looked like as they were going.
What do you say to people that are still doubters about this?
I say that you relieve my guilt that I have. In a way, I embrace the doubters, because I feel a lot of guilt about how I used to look at it. And somehow, when people doubt the story, I can say, see, they're in medicine too, and they doubted, and that's why I was the way I was.
Hi, my name is Petro. I want to talk to you today about an experience that I had a few days before graduation. We went to a senior class picnic just prior to graduation, and in that picnic event, during that picnic event, I was swimming out to a raft by myself, got cramps, I drowned, I died, I went into the light, and then I came back again. What I'd like to describe to you is the process of dying. First of all, the drowning process was not a fun process. It was horrible, it was painful. I was stuck at the bottom of the lake. I had aches and pains in every cell of my body. I didn't know what else to do. I was screaming internally for one breath of air. All I wanted was one breath of air, but I couldn't get it. And then a voice inside of my head said to me, Andy, called me Andy. It said, Andy, you need a rest, just for a moment. And I said to the voice, no, I don't think I want to rest. I have to get up for the air. And in trying to get up, I found that I was stuck in the mud. My hands were stuck in the mud. I couldn't pull them out, and I'm imprisoned. And then the voice said to me again, Andy, you can continue the struggle, but you want to rest for just one moment. And so I said to the voice, okay, all right, I'll give it a rest for just a minute, and then I'm going to continue. I'll let go. And as soon as the word go formed in my mind, I was pulled out of my body. And all of a sudden, I looked down and I could see my body stuck in the mud. But I'm in a body. I can feel it. No longer am I cold and freezing and stuck in the mud, but I'm warm and I'm filled with a love and a peace that I cannot explain. So in less than a microsecond, from freezing, cold, horrible pain, I was filled with love and peace and happiness and smiles. And as I looked opposite from my body, looked up into the tunnel, there I saw light. The light was so bright that it was brighter than 10,000 suns. And I immediately said, this should be burning my retinas. But it wasn't. It was a gentle but powerful light. It was pulling me. It was pulling me like a gentle magnet, closer and closer. And the closer I got, the more I was filled with an ecstasy, with a love, with an unconditional love of me as Andy. And as I got closer to the light, all of a sudden, I popped into a giant sphere. It was about the size of a basketball coliseum. And I was suspended in the middle of this sphere. And all around me, at all parts of the sphere, up, down, sideways, left, right, all over, were miniature motion pictures of my lives and what was going on. And I could see, I could touch, I could feel, I could sense every emotion that was taking place in all of those lifetimes. And when I would concentrate on one, I would immediately be there. I would be reliving what I had lived. And I would remember the reliving. And then I would think about another area, and then I'd pop into another movie. And I would do this for some period of time, but you have to understand that when you're in the eternal now, time doesn't make any sense. So it isn't time like yesterday, today, and tomorrow. It's happening all the time, all at once. And I was there for an extended period using earth terms. And then, all of a sudden, I popped out of the sphere, and now I'm in front of the light. And the light is so warm and so glowing and so forgiving. And the light had no judgment. There was no condemnation. There was no blaming, no shame. There was nothing but love and acceptance. And the light was viewing me. The light knew everything that I ever thought, did, or will do. It knew everything. And the light welcomed me. And the light said, Andy, don't be afraid. And I was impressed. I mean, the light knew me and called me by my name. Called me Andy. Oh, that was pretty good. And then the light said, Andy, I love you. And then the light said, Andy, we love you. Now when the light said, Andy, we love you, I looked in back of the light. And the light was a huge, giant form that I've never seen on earth and that I cannot describe, but I recognize it, and I can see it right now in my mind's eye. And as the light said to me, Andy, we love you, in back of the light were billions and billions and billions of other lights. And all of them knew me. And they all said in a giant chorus, welcome home, Andy. And I said out loud, I'm home. At last I'm home. And the light welcomed me. The light absorbed me into the light. So I was part of the light. And once I was in the light, I knew everything the light knew. I knew all about the universe. I knew everything about flowers, about plants, about asteroids, about suns, about novas, everything. I didn't have a question for the light. Why? Because I know all the answers. I had nothing to ask. And we laughed and we played, and by the way, the light has a fantastic sense of humor. We would view some of the really silly things that I did in my lifetime, and we'd be laughing at how serious I took them. Because life down here is an illusion. It's a game. Don't take it so serious. The life has a wonderful sense of humor. And we're laughing and we're talking and we're just having a great time, and then the light says to me, Andy, you have to go back. Now, I'm not going back. I said to the light, I don't think so. I'm home. I'm staying. And then the light said to me for the second time, Andy, you're going back. And I said, no, you don't understand. I don't want to go back into that body. I don't want to go back on earth. I'm home here in the light. And then the light said for the third time, Andy, you're going back. And as soon as I heard the K from the back, I was pushed back into my body, filled with pain and anxiety. And during all of that process, I was now on the beach, and my friends were pushing the water out of my lungs, and I was coughing the water out, and I was completely conscious. And I was crying. And all of my classmates thought I was crying from the pain of drowning. But I was crying because I was no longer in the light. I was back in my body. I was back on earth. I wanted to be in the light. During this entire episode, from the moment I start sinking into the water and the mud, up until the moment I was coughing water out of my lungs on the beach, I never lost consciousness. I was aware of every microsecond of that time. Being in the light was being in unconditional love. Unconditional love means unconditional forgiveness. Unconditional forgiveness causes you to smile forever. That's the story, folks. That's what it feels like to die and come back again. Thanks for listening.
On Columbus Day, 1985, I was in a fatal car crash. It was a head-on collision. I was driving down the road. Another car was coming the other way. We were going through an intersection. At the last minute, he decided to turn left right in front of me. Bam. I think I had enough time to say, oh my God, didn't even get to say turning. Next thing I knew, I was looking down at the top of my car. I was like, whoa, this is really cool. Now, fortunately, I had heard about out-of-body experiences. I'd never had one, always wanted one. Suddenly, I was having one. So I looked down and I see my car crunched, and I saw the guy get out of his car and walk over to mine, reach in and turn my headlights off. Didn't quite know what that meant until later. And I suddenly lost interest in what was going on down there because I saw this white light over here, which I had heard about, fortunately, and I said, whoa, there's the white light, I'm going. And there was this tunnel. It seemed very dark, but there was this great light at the end. And I really wanted to find out what was at the other side. And there was this feeling that was coming through this tunnel of love. And I just sort of thought, I want to go through that. And the next thing, I was through it. And I was in this place, but it wasn't a place like here. It was an environment, an atmosphere. And it was love. It was amazing. It was total bliss, total joy, total love, total acceptance, total everything is fine and always will be and always has been. It felt like home. felt like that's where I belonged, and that's the way it's supposed to feel all the time. But, of course, that's not the way it feels here. So I sort of looked around, and I think I needed to have a concept of place, so suddenly it sort of seemed like a place again. And I looked over to the right, and I saw all these relatives of mine who had died before, and they were waving and smiling, and I smiled and waved, but I didn't feel like I was supposed to go over and talk to them, because that's sort of not why I was there. But it was good to see them, and they were all doing great, and I could just feel that. And the next thing I knew, I was standing in the middle of a circle of these 12-foot beings of light. And I'm only 5'4", you know, so they were pretty intimidating, but not really, because they felt more like family than the people I had seen. And they felt so familiar and so loving. And I remember saying, I'm not going back there because it's nasty. People are mean, and it's like walking through hip-deep molasses, just trying to get anywhere or do anything, and people are nasty to each other, and it's just bad, and I'm not going back. And it sort of felt like I was having an argument with them, but when I think about it, they weren't really arguing. I was just sort of standing there going like this, and they were sort of going, yes, dear, it's all right, dear. You're doing fine. You can do whatever you want. And it just seemed to go on for this timeless period. And I really wanted to stay because it was really good there. And the next thing I knew, I woke up in the emergency room at the hospital and said, oh my God, what happened? And the nurse said, you were in a car accident. And I said, that's not what I mean, because I wasn't supposed to come back. But here I was, and boy, did it feel different. I mean, 3 dimensions, when there's not a lot of love, is a real difference from where I was. And it was very hard to make the transition. I knew that I had had what they call a near-death experience. I'd even heard about them. I'd even read about them before. But I didn't know exactly what you're supposed to do with that, because nothing was the same. It still felt the same. It still felt like here I am in the world, and people are still mean to each other. And it's not that love energy that was there that felt like the heart of God. It felt like going back and standing in the middle of the heart of God. And suddenly it felt like I wasn't there anymore. And here I was. I felt like I had been like tossed like a stone. So they say it takes about 15 years to incorporate one of these experiences, and I think that's true, because my understanding of it changed over time. And here it is 2007, so it's been over 20 years. And here are some of the things I've learned from this. Your priorities change because you realize that the most important thing is love. The only thing is love. That's really the only thing there is. Except sometimes it's expressed as fear, the opposite side of it. And all that petty stuff doesn't matter. Of course, you change a lot when that happens, and people feel weird around you. So you lose friends, and you get new ones. A lot of people change jobs. A lot of people get divorced. But you're incorporating this feeling of love into your life. And I think that's what people with NDEs really do. And it takes a long time because you're shifting and you're changing, and you got a lot of history. So we all know that we came back with a mission. Most of us don't know what it was at the time, but we know we had one. And you spend a lot of time trying to figure out what that was. And at different times since then, I've come up with ideas of what my mission was. But now I think my mission, and everybody's mission, is to be here in 3 dimensions, in this time, in this space, and to hold the energy of the light of God. Just hold it. We don't have to do anything. Just hold that energy. And as we hold it, we help other people around us find that energy and feel that energy. Humanity is changing, humanity is evolving, and this is the time. And all you have to remember is there is nothing out there to fear. You are a divine, powerful being. We all are. We're all part of God. We're all part of love. That's who we are. We are the heart of God. And we're here to bring that to planet Earth, to create heaven on Earth. And we can do it in love. That's why we're here.
How old are you today?
Me.
And what is your name?
Beaufort.
And where do you live?
In Nebraska.
Who's your mommy?
Sonia.
Who's your daddy?
Daddy. Popo.
Who's your sister?
Cassie.
That was 8 years ago. Looking at Colton now, you would have never guessed that he almost died in 2003. His father, Todd, tells about Colton's near-death experience in the book, Heaven is for Real.
And he started throwing up into the toilet, you know, and at first we're like, okay, he's got the stomach flu, because the doctor said it was going around.
Colton's condition only got worse as days passed. His doctor discovered his appendix had burst, and infection was spreading in his body. Time was running out.
And we knew we were in bad shape when they said, well, you need to come out to the hallway. They separated us from everyone else, and then someone came to us and started talking to us that we got to have surgery on your kid.
It was tough. Seeing your boy be lifeless when he was a very vibrant child.
And it was at that moment that we were looking at each other. I remember my wife holding Colton in that hallway, just us. He's not even moving. We went to the surgery prep area, and I remember them hauling him away and him just yelling at me, Daddy, don't let him take me. Daddy, don't let him take me. And I went back to the pre-op room where we had left some stuff, and I was finally alone, shut the door, and I just broke down and I was mad at God. I just frustrated, fed up. And I remember telling him, I said, God, after all I've done for you, and now you're going to take my kid? This is how you treat your pastors?
And I was calling our prayer chain. I was calling anybody that would be on the other line to get Colton on the prayer chain because it was bad.
We were there in the waiting room for an hour and a half, maybe. Then I remember the nurse coming out. Is Colton's daddy out here? I'm like, yeah, well, Colton's in recovery and he's screaming for you. And I'm sitting there with him. And I remember my son in that room then looking up at me and goes, Dad, do you know I almost died? And my first thought was, maybe he overheard the nurse say that, or maybe they thought he was under anesthesia, you know, and he wasn't. But it wasn't till 4 months after we got out of the hospital that we finally listened to our son.
And that's where I got to see heaven. No, Jesus and some angels came and flew me up to heaven.
And I said, so Colton, what did Jesus look like?
I knew that the first person I saw was Jesus. He was wearing white robes with a purple sash, and he just came down nicely and gracefully.
Well, Dad, Jesus has markers. Dad, Jesus has markers. I didn't know what he meant, so I finally asked the right question. Colton, where are Jesus' markers? And he drops his toys down, and he stands up, and he just points, Dad, they were right here. He takes his fingers, points to the palms, then he bends over and touches the tops of his feet and looks up to me. That's where Jesus' markers were, Dad.
When I was in the throne room of God to start with, so I got to see what that looked like. I was upset because I didn't know what was happening. What God did is he used people or things that I liked to calm me down. From there on, I felt better.
And one day we're traveling together, and he looks up at me and, Dad, you used to have a grandpa named Pop, didn't you? I'm like, yeah, he's really nice. Really? Yeah, you used to play with him as a kid and work with him on the farm and shoot stuff with him. I'm like, yeah, how do you know that? Well, he told me.
A figure came up, and he was Pop. He asked me, are you Todd's son? I said yes. He said that he was his grandpa, so that's where I met him.
Yeah, Pop, I was very close to him, and he was my most significant male role model when I was a kid growing up. But he was killed in a car wreck before I turned 7.
I was busy paying bills again, because that's my job, and he came up and told me he had 2 sisters. Well, he had to say it several times before he finally got my attention, and finally I put myself down and looked at him and says, what do you mean you have 2 sisters? No, I have 2 sisters. You had a baby die in your tummy. And I just looked at him like, well, how do you know you have 2 sisters? Well, she told me. And then he proceeded to describe her.
She looked like Cassie, but she had brown hair. And first time when she saw me, she just came up and hugged me.
We knew this was true because he said, she kept hugging me. She wouldn't stop hugging me, Mom, and I didn't like that.
Well, I'm not really the hugging type.
I had miscarried the weekend of Father's Day weekend, which made it even rougher. And we thought we'd dealt with it. We gotten over, we accepted that the baby had died. But when he said he had 2 sisters, I think I was in shock first and then trying to realize, what is he telling me? And so I knew that he had seen her, and after he described her, and he said, she's just waiting for you guys to come to heaven.
You know, as we talked about heaven, and he was telling me all these wonderful details, I just felt like I had to ask him, did he want to come back?
I knew that I was leaving heaven because Jesus came to me and said, Colton, you need to go back. Even though I didn't want to go back, he said that he was answering my dad's prayer.
I remember that prayer. That irreverent, that disrespectful, screaming at God prayer. I was like, he's answering that prayer?
Today, Colton is a healthy 11-year-old and shares his heavenly journey with boldness.
I learned that heaven is for real, and you're going to like it.
While all the near-death experiences featured in this presentation are unique and special, there are 2 things that make Howard Storm's NDE especially interesting. First, before Storm died, he describes himself as a prideful, arrogant atheist. He didn't believe in God, didn't believe in life after death, and thought that anyone who did was crazy. His experience completely changed these views and his life. Second, Storm's near-death experience began as a distressing or hellish one. The best numbers we have today indicate as many as 1 in 5 people may have these kind of NDEs. While our understanding is still limited as to why some people have these disturbing experiences and what can be done to change, transform, and or avoid them, the turning point in Storm's experience is echoed in many others. When he looked up and asked for help from a higher power he didn't even believe in, he was delivered.
June 1st, 1985, I was dying in a hospital in Paris, France. I was a college professor. I was 38 years old at the time, taking a group of art students around, and I had a medical incident, which was a perforation of the duodenum, which they weren't treating at all. And after 10 hours of no drugs, no doctor, no blood pressure, no temperature, no nothing, just being parked in this hospital. And the doctors in the United States said that my life expectancy would have been 5 hours because it's like having a burst appendix. I was dying, and I said goodbye to my wife and I went into unconsciousness, and I awoke from that feeling more alive, more real. My senses were enhanced more than they'd ever been before. And I tried to communicate with my wife and the roommate that I had, and couldn't. And there were people outside the room calling me, telling me to come with them. And I went over, and I assumed that I was alive and more well than ever been in my life, although for 10 hours I'd been dying. Now all of a sudden, you know, this miraculous recovery, it felt like, except that there was this very disturbing thing in the bed that I had been in, which looked like me, which I refused to believe was me, because you can't be feeling good and up and around, and there's you in the bed. Wow. So you know, it's just like too confusing and weird. So it's just like, let's not think about that. So I went over to these people and I said, "Are you going to take me to surgery? You're going to, you know, I'm sick and I need help." And they said, "Come with us. We've been waiting for you a long time. We know all about you." Really scary stuff when you know what these people were about. Because what they were about was they led me on a long journey into complete abject darkness. In that darkness, they began to push and pull and fight with me. And they wanted to take me deeper and deeper into that darkness. And I was resisting going any further with them.
Yes.
And they played with me because what they were doing was introducing me to the world of the outer darkness of the weeping and gnashing of teeth. And this was just the beginning of it. Hell is extensive, and it has exquisite torments that go on and on beyond any human imagination. This wasn't even the front porch. I hadn't even gotten on the front porch yet. This is just the beginning. And as they tore me apart with their teeth and with their claws, there was nothing left to resist them anymore. And I lay in that place, and for the first time in my adult life, I tried to pray. And that drove them away from me enough to leave me alone. And I lay in there in that eternity, in that darkness, and thought about my life and how much I'd missed it. Everything that I thought I was so great. I was 38 years old. I had a career. I had a wife. I had kids. But I realized in that place that I completely missed the entire point. I'd flunked life. You know, and I felt so ashamed and empty. And as I lay in that place of self-pity and what's going to happen to me, because I thought that eventually they're going to take me back and further process me into that place of complete hopelessness and despair and horror, that I recalled what I had heard in a Sunday school class when I was a little boy, and that was, if you allow me, Jesus loves me. This I know. And more importantly than the words was, I knew that when I was a little boy, I had actually believed that there was this cool dude, this neat guy named Jesus who cared about me. And I yelled out to him with no idea whether he was real or not, or whether he could hear me, and I'm just not going to go down that place. Jesus, please save me. And he came to me, and he touched me, and all of my wounds and all of the gore and horror disappeared. And he picked me up and held me to him. And Jesus. I cannot begin to describe the love that I felt from him. But I do want to add one thing, one little comment. In addition to a love that's beyond words or explanation, I knew that Jesus really, really liked me. And you know what? He likes you. Can you believe it? Jesus likes everyone out there. You know, he made us. Yes. You know, the whole world was made through him.
Yes.
And, you know, the reason why we are shaped the way we are, the reason why we think the way we are, is because he made us, and he wants us to be successful. And success means that doing the best that we possibly can in the circumstances that we're in this world, to love God with all our heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love our neighbor as ourselves, to know him and to love him in this world, and to join him when we leave this little tiny preview of coming attractions so that we can go to the main event.
Wow.
And the main event goes on and gets better and better and better and better and better.
Wow. Wow. Wow.
God, I hope people will take this in the spirit that it's meant. God wants no one to go to hell. God wants everyone to be successful. God wants everybody to come to heaven. But people, when they reject God, when they reject the Son of God, when they reject the love of God, when they reject the message of God, they are saying, I don't want what you've got, and I don't want to be there. And God never coerces anyone into anything.
Yeah.
God's love is an invitation, but not doesn't force it.
Before this happened, you're 38 years old when this happened, right? What was your attitude towards God, heaven, and hell 6 months before this happened?
When I was a kid, I had rejected my faith. This is back in the 60s and stuff, and I'd rejected all that. I went into a church, and God and I had it out, and I walked out of there, you know, saying, I'm never going to have anything with you again. Like, I don't believe in you. So like so many of the viewers tonight, and I think maybe a majority of the people in this country, and I hope that I'm wrong, I was my own God. Yeah. I didn't have a God. I had a God, and my God was me. Yeah. I decided what was right and wrong and what was true and not like that. That's right. It's the most pathetic God you could possibly have. Yeah. You may as well have a toad for God. But,
toad, you said.
But
yeah,
really. I believed in myself, and that's all I believed in. And I was out for what I could get. I didn't believe that there was life after death. I thought anyone that believed in life after death and anything like that was like loco, you know. No way you could. Right. That science had all the answers. I was a university professor. I was a department head at a university and stuff like that. I mean, I was full of pride, full of arrogance, and it's a prescription for disaster.
Mm. What happened, and how has that experience affected your life?
Jesus took me out of there. He did a life review and went over my whole life, and then he answered every question that I had, everything that I could think of. And then ultimately, he gave me the word that I didn't want to hear. I had to come back, and he and I had a big discussion, because I wanted to go to heaven, and he wanted me to come back and try and have a life, get a life, you know. And so I came back, and after the experience, one of the things that I, of course, wondered about was how real was it. And I realized every day for months afterwards, the angels and occasionally Jesus came back and visited me while I was conscious, while I was awake, in the hospital, trying to build me up. And they have been my constant companions ever since. I do want to say that Jesus is the best friend that I've ever had. He is my Lord. He is my King. He is my Savior. He's the Son of God. But he's my best friend. And I love him. And he loves me.
A common theme that repeats in Howard Storm's near-death experience is that experiencers are often confronted with information that shakes and challenges their views of life in the universe. Storm's worldview was upset when he discovered there was both a God and an afterlife. Later he learned that we are not alone in the universe. Instead, the universe is full of other worlds and other dimensions that are also full of inhabited worlds. Storm was also shown how each person is escorted toward heaven according to his or her life, culture, and spiritual level. Storm discusses all of this and more in his book, My Descent into Death. Finally, here is Howard Storm describing the future of the world as it was shown to him.
The world that they showed me in the near future, in a couple hundred years from now, is a world that is difficult for me to understand or accept. There was what I saw was no visible signs of technology. If there was technology, they hid it from me, or it was so subtle that I couldn't even see it. You know, maybe that's the case, but I assumed that, like, in the future, it would be a world of, like, high technology, and they showed me a world of not low technology, of no technology, where people's relationship with God, with the creation, and with one another was so intense that human beings controlled the weather of the planet. Not just for the welfare of human beings, but for the welfare of the entire planet. Everybody in the world was telepathically connected to everybody else in the whole world. People raised food by simply I don't know, meditating or thinking about the food, and the food would just grow, and then they would pick it and eat it. I mean, it was, you know, not instantaneous, but just happened before your eyes. I mean, a cabbage would grow from a seed to a full-blown cabbage in a matter of a few minutes. People lived in small communities. People could move from community to community freely if they wanted to. Most people didn't move around very much. Some communities put an emphasis on music, some communities put an emphasis on science, some communities put an emphasis on celebration, liturgy, worship. Some communities spent their time on physical relaxation and enjoyment, sports, and that sort of thing. Some communities were very contemplative and did seemingly very little. Some communities were very active and sort of like were very much engaged with their environment, sort of what we would call gardeners, but they were literally environmental sculptors, you know, making these very beautiful places with the vegetation and the geology around them. I mean, different communities had different emphasis, but they lived in total harmony with the flora and the fauna around them, in complete harmony with one another, and the main emphasis of every community was the individuals in the community, and most especially the children. When people had experienced what they felt was their full life experience, there would be a great celebration, and they would lay down, and they would die, and their souls, their spirits, whatever, would be raised up to heaven. Dying was not seen as a sad thing or grievous thing. It was a joyous time. It was like it was celebrated as a birth. People ate simply, dressed simply. From what I was shown, there were no possessions other than the clothes on their back and a few simple instruments like musical instruments or tools or things like that, which were pretty much shared communally. It was a world that's very difficult for me to make any sense of it, because it's like, you know, there was great happiness, there was very little suffering, there was no disease because people could, with laying on of hands, people could heal diseases immediately. The only real suffering that they showed me was sometimes people felt a sense of separateness, and the community would allow these people to feel that, but they would pray for that person. They would surround that person with love and bring that person back into the community. So it was possible for people to move a little bit away from the spirit of the community, but they were brought back into the community. No one was left. No one was ever lost for very long. But it was important sometimes for people to feel, you know, to appreciate what they had. They needed to, you know, lose a little bit of it once in a while. The Spirit of Christ lived in every heart, fully and completely. It's a world that is so completely unlike the world that we live in, that just how can we ever get there? But they assured me that this was the world that God envisioned for us, and it's not that far away.
You've talked about twice having a near-death experience. Does it mean you don't fear it anymore?
I don't fear it. Because when I was on the other side, like in the tunnel, and was with Mike, it was so beautiful and warm. And the light was so welcoming. And I held on to him, and he said, "You have to go back. You have things to do, and I'll be here. And this was so long ago, when I came out of 7 minutes of not breathing and no heartbeat and pronounced dead. It's still something I don't like to talk about much because it was very painful. I wanted to stay with Mike. Adjusting to life again was like learning to walk all over. But then I started appreciating sounds, colors, music. And I thought, my God, I've taken all this for granted. And it's so incredibly beautiful. And it made me cry. And I thought, thank you, God.
Elizabeth Taylor is not the only celebrity who publicly discussed having a near-death experience. Here are a few others. To learn more, visit the link at the bottom of this page. This concludes part 1 of my 2-part presentation on how near-death experiences are changing the world. In part 2, we'll hear 5 more remarkable stories, discuss the nature of reality, miracles, and spontaneous healings, explore how and why the core themes of NDEs come in so many different flavors, review Dr. Jeffrey Long's list of NDE after effects, listen to Raymond Moody talk about his new research involving shared death experiences, and hone in on 2 NDE takeaways that have the potential to change our lives. Part 2 also includes a list of websites and resources for people who have had a near-death experience and need help understanding and integrating it. Links to social networks where you can gather with others who are seeking to learn more about this subject, and finally, information about the follow-up classes that are connected to this presentation. I hope you'll join me for part 2.